have everything she wanted.
He's a good-looking guy, well-educated. They made each other laugh. She was happy, so I was happy.
This one night, the doorbell rang. There's a woman there that she doesn't know. She said that she was looking for Stacy's husband.
My involvement with everything that happened, I didn't know what could have such a devastating impact on so many people's lives.
It was the beginning of hell.
For 911, what is the address?
Oh my God, I need help. Please help me, please.
Okay, help is on the way, sir.
Please, baby, please, 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 please. Please help me.
My sister Stacy had the best personality of anybody I know. She was the life of the party. She just really wanted to have fun.
Funny is an understatement. She was there to make people smile and feel happy around her. She would do anything to make you laugh.
It looks like she has a doily on her head. This is the kind of stuff she did all the time. You see that smile? It's in every picture. It's contagious.
I felt like a sister to her. And because of her incredible family, they allowed me to feel like a sister.
Stacy's life dream was to have children and to be a mom.
It was almost a given that that was her life path. I mean, she was incredible with children.
Right after college, she was working in marketing.
Every job she had was for a fundraising organization. Anything to help the greater good and help people.
She did meet a guy that she ended up falling in love with and getting engaged to. He was a wonderful man, and as the wedding date got closer, it was clear that something wasn't right, and that wedding got canceled. Stacy was devastated. She thought that this was the love of her life. Her biological clock started ticking very, very early. This was not part of her plan. Her plan included being married before she was 30, having kids before she was 30, and it threw her for a loop. She needed to change the scenery. And wouldn't it be fun to move to Boston and take care of her niece? And she became our nanny. And it was magical. When I first met him, it was at our house. He was coming to pick her up for a date. He was very charming, very likable, and seemed to be enamored of her.
On paper, he looked great. He's a good-looking guy, well-educated. They made each other laugh. She had high hopes for a change. I think she really loved the idea She met him at the right time in her life, so.
They went to Boston on their first date and drove around looking for a parking meter. And he had this little trick that will jimmy the parking meter so that you don't have to put money in it. And Stacy thought, wow, isn't that kind of cool? And I thought, I don't think that's cool at all. I think that's stealing. I didn't like that, and that was their very first date. He came from a Jewish family, a close family. His parents were divorced when he was a child. And he had promised her that divorce would never be in their future because of the trauma that it did to him. Stacy's heart was broken when her first engagement was broken. And she was guarded, and he was going to be her forever. He promised her that she would have everything she wanted, that she would be a stay-at-home mom, that he was going to provide for the family, that she wasn't going to have to work. I never knew how that was going to happen because he never really had a job. He was a bit of a scammer. He always had ways of scamming the system. One of the things he did while he was in Boston, I'll never forget this. He went to an electronics store and took the electronic out of the box, filled the box with heavy bricks, and returned the box, got his money back.
He did seem like a freeloader. I wasn't sure about his motivation to find something to support a family, so I was a little bit concerned.
Looking back on it, the red flags were there. One night I had invited Stacy and him to come out for dinner with us, and Stacy really wanted to come out with us, and he refused. He wanted to stay home and cook. I knew that what that meant for Stacy is that he would use every dish in the kitchen and then leave all the dishes for her because he never wanted to do dishes. Whatever he wanted, he got. Whatever he said, we all followed his rules. It wasn't about what Stacy wanted that night. It was really only about what he wanted.
They decided they would move to Denver, Colorado.
If he was to be her Prince Charming and give her what she wanted in a marriage, being a stay-at-home mom, Robert needed to have a job. We have lots of family in Denver. So Stacy thought, well, maybe he'll just come to Denver with me. My relatives will help him get a job, and at least, he'll work, he'll have income. Stacy was so excited. She was really ready to move on to the next stage.
I think my gut told me he's not deserving yet to make this move with her and to be so immersed in her incredible family. And I was worried that if he did go with her, she was never coming back.
About a week before they were set to move, she and I went out for dinner together. And this is probably the one and only time I ever put myself out there like this with her. I said, "Are you sure you want him to come with you? You are moving to a new place. You have so many opportunities. Are you sure this is what you want?" And she said to me, and I will never forget it, she said, "Susan, he told me that he had a tough childhood and he had to take care of himself. And so he's number one in his book. He's always going to be number one." And I said, "Stacy, is that the kind of person that you want to marry?" And she said the typical, classic textbook response. "He will change for me." This is one of my greatest regrets. I think this is one of all of our greatest regrets, is that we didn't know what was happening. We didn't put it all together.
Denver 911. What's your address?
Please help me!
They were moving in together. They were setting up the kitchen. They had a huge fight about where to place a garbage can.
He made it clear how he wanted things and how they were going to be. Stacy had a mind of her own. She spoke back, but he wanted things a certain way. When he wanted something, he wanted them his way.
Stacy actually ended up leaving him and moving into my parents' house. Robert apologized and promised it won't happen again.
I was hopeful that this was it, but it was maybe a few days, and then they got back together.
Stacy was just too invested at that point and was looking for her happily ever after. When she told me that she was engaged, my heart dropped. While she was thrilled about her dreams coming true of getting married and having babies, my stomach sunk, my heart sunk. I wasn't happy for her. I pretended, I put on a show. I never shared my true feelings with her about her future. That's something that I regret to this day.
So it was a lovely wedding, and it coincided with the Oscar Awards that were broadcast around, it was around the same time. He had a really great speech. And he used the terms from the Oscar Awards. For example, producer, the director was his whatever. He would thank people and acknowledge them, the people in his life and his family, by giving them titles. And so we all assumed his leading lady, it was there. It was there for the taking, leading lady. It never happened. He never mentioned Stacy. It was devastating. It was embarrassing. She was mortified. Directly affected her, and that was, it was sad. It's a hard way to start.
Yep. See her crown? She wanted to be a princess. That's her wedding day. Do you notice her smile is not quite the same smile that we saw in earlier photos? I wonder about that.
They got married in March, so the following June they had their daughter. Beautiful girl, and within 2 years of that, they had their son.
Becoming a mom was her greatest joy, and she was the best mother ever. Stacy stopped working and started living a life that she always dreamt of.
His job was commission-based, so you really had to be motivated and work hard. He didn't. If he was home, I remember him sitting. That's the truth. I have visions of him just sitting on the couch in a bathrobe. He was never working.
Stacy eventually went back to work.
She got a great job again in nonprofit industry, and she was doing exceptionally well.
She did it because she needed to provide for her family. Her dream of being a stay-at-home mom was crushed.
We knew he was a lowlife and wasn't going to provide, but then there was this whole other chapter that started. A girlfriend and I went down to Denver to celebrate my birthday. And the day we got there, we needed to use her computer, so we went to their family computer. We sort of just moved the mouse, and we were immediately faced with the open page of a dating app.
Jan called me right away and said she saw a dating website and that Stacy's husband had a profile.
At first we were confused, and then we saw that there was correspondence, and whereas we were told that he had a meeting that night and he wasn't coming home for dinner, he in fact had a date that evening. I was shocked. I was scared. I didn't understand how it was open on their family computer, and I didn't know what to do. I was really upset. I was very upset. At that moment, we did nothing. We didn't tell her.
Neither of us knew what to do. We did nothing. If we had to do it over again, I would have done it differently.
What if she turned on us? What if she alienated us?
I talked to Stacy every evening after she put the kids to bed. And there was this one night that we were doing our daily call, and the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. So she goes to the door. There's a woman there that she doesn't know. She said that she was looking for Stacy's husband. It turns out that it was somebody that he had met on a website, and she came to the door looking for him.
It came out that he was with her sexually. Stacy was shocked and surprised and disgusted. That's when chaos started.
Stacy confided in me that she had found out about her husband's affair. He claimed He needed to get this sex wherever he could find it. As miserable and sad as she was more forgiving than maybe she should have been. I talked to her about it, and she point blank said, "I don't want to be a single mom." I don't think our society is supportive of single moms. I think she felt shame in the situation that she was in. She didn't have any friends that were divorced. She insisted that they seek therapy. And he would start at her insistence, and he wouldn't finish. He wouldn't continue to go. There would always be an excuse. He didn't like the person. He didn't need the help.
He was making excuses for himself, but it was mean, it was hurtful. He told her that he needed her to lose weight so that he could be attracted to her again. How he spoke to her, it was shocking. He was rude, he was mean. I couldn't believe it. They tried every avenue. Nothing worked, nothing helped, and it didn't stop.
We talked about her leaving him. I talked to her about what she wanted to do about that. And we had made a plan that she was gonna leave. But he said to her, "I will never divorce you. I will never let you divorce me because I am a product of a broken marriage, and I will not do that to my children." She was crying and crying and crying. And I was listening to her. I wasn't saying a lot, I was just listening to her. And I had this thought. And I said to myself, if she ends up dead, it's because he's gonna kill her.
On Thursday, we were planning to get together at a wine bar after work. It was blizzarding that night. It was a really snowy night. And he said, "Why don't I just come to you?" That evening, I asked a lot of questions about his situation with his wife. He had explained to me that the reason that he separated from her was because she was an absentee mother. Bob had said, I'm always taking the kids skiing into the mountains and camping, and she's really not involved, and I didn't sign up for that. I thought, Bob must be a really dedicated father. We ended up sleeping together that night. I was feeling good about him. But 15 minutes later, he sat up in bed and said, "I gotta go." I thought at that point, he's lying to me, he's married or something. From then, I started Googling Bob Wolf, and nothing came up. So at that point, I decided to do a reverse lookup on the phone number he gave me. I found a LinkedIn profile, and it had a big picture of him. It said Robert W. Feldman. I started Googling his wife at that point. And what I found was that she was the president of the PTO of the kids' grade school. So not only was she not an absentee mother, but she was a really dedicated mother who volunteered her time. I was really angry. Bob had disparaged her and lied to me. I felt she had the right to know. I wrote her an email and I said, Stacy, you don't know me, but I'm trying to find out if you and Bob are separated. If you're not, he's cheating on you. We slept together once and he blew me off after that. She wrote back at 8:30 and said, no, we are not separated. I'm done with him now. I've had it. I said, are you going to be okay? And she said, I have a really supportive family and lots of friends. I'll be fine. But I really do appreciate you reaching out. It was a good conversation. It was, I was feeling like I had done the right thing. I didn't know it could have such a devastating impact on so many people's lives.
Denver 911, what is the address?
Oh my God, I need help. Please help me, please.
What's your address?
My wife's not breathing. I found her in the shower, please. Please help me.
I'm sending help out to you, sir. I'm going to give you some instructions, okay, before they get there. Are you with your wife now?
Yes.
Is she awake?
No. I found her in the shower, please.
Okay. Is she breathing?
No, she's not. What do we do?
Listen carefully and I'll tell you how to do a chest compression. Pump the chest hard and fast, at least twice per second and 2 inches deep. Count out loud so I can count with you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, please help me, please.
Okay, help is on the way, sir. Keep pumping, you're doing good.
Please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Please, baby, please.
I was getting ready to go out and the phone rang and one of my kids answered the phone and said, Grandpa's on the phone. So I get on the phone and my dad says, Stacy's dead. And I said, what? And he said, Stacy's dead. I screamed. I broke into tears. I sort of felt like I was up in the clouds looking in and that this really wasn't happening.
I remember my 11-year-old daughter holding me while I was screaming. I don't remember much.
Stacy's husband told the detective that she wasn't feeling well and she didn't get out of bed that morning. And he took the children to school, and when he came home later in the afternoon is when he found her dead. They asked him if he wanted an autopsy done, and he said that we are Jewish and Jewish people don't do autopsies, and he did not want to have one done. But it is just customary that when a young person dies without a history of illness, that an autopsy has to be done. It's mandatory.
I had had another bad internet date, didn't go well. And I got home and I was just lying in bed on my phone and I thought, I wonder if they got divorced. So I Googled and her obituary came up pretty much immediately. Oh, my stomach just turned. I looked at the date of her death and I realized that that was around the time I spoke to her. And so I went and looked at my email to her and I realized it was the same day. I couldn't believe it. I looked up the number for Denver Homicide and they were very interested in what I had to say. I told him the whole story. He told me in the interview that the medical examiner had ruled her death undetermined. They were continuing to follow leads. I'm a researcher, and when the detective told me that the cause of death was undetermined, I wanted to see it for myself. I left the detective's office and I went to the medical examiner's office and I got a copy of the autopsy. I read the details and it said she had bruising about her head and upper body. She was found with her tongue clenched between her teeth. I knew from reading it that something very wrong had happened.
I wanted to closely examine the evidence, looking for clues that may have been not appreciated or missed as part of the initial investigation. Robert Feldman told the police that he came home and found his wife naked in the shower. Didn't know whether she had drowned, fallen, had a heart attack. He didn't know. The detectives and the first responders felt there was something unusual about his demeanor.
Are you with your wife now?
Yes.
Is she awake?
No.
I listened to the 911 call. He sounded over hysterical, very dramatic.
Please, please, please.
Being found dead in the bathtub is highly suspicious of a stage scene. When I looked at the location of Stacy's injuries, it was not what you would expect to see from a fall in a bathtub. Too many, way too many. There were, we call them pattern imprints, pattern abrasions, which tells me that when those injuries were sustained, she was clothed. Yet, she is found naked in the bathtub. When I analyzed the photographs from the bathroom, I saw an imprint of some sort. That is what you expect to see with the sole of a shoe. Why would your boots be inside of the bathtub? The only reason is if you were trying to pull someone into the tub. She had injuries to her eyes from increased pressure that you see during strangulation, more than 50 in each eye. She had bruises on the arms, consistent with her arms being held down while she's being assaulted. This was, in fact, death from strangulation or suffocation. It was clear to me that one, this was a staged crime scene, and two, that Stacy Feldman had been murdered.
I walked up on the witness stand. They asked me to identify Bob, and I pointed straight at him. I said, "He's right there." And I looked him right in the eye, and he just stared at me, a very blank stare. There was no emotion, no nothing.
Prosecutor said Stacy confronted him about the latest affair and told him that she's done and the marriage is over. It's one thing to react and get upset, but there's that piece, that evil piece, that allowed him to hurt her the way he did and kill her.
Dr. Smock pointed out every single mark that she had on her body. And he pointed out that it was a violent death and that she fought back. And all I could think about that whole time is, what is Stacy thinking? Is she thinking about me? Is she thinking that she's gonna die? Is she thinking about her kids? I had no idea how I managed those 7 years between him killing her and hit the verdict, because of delays that his lawyer was able to get for him, because of financial delays, because of COVID. We had years of being in limbo. Every time we thought we were going to get close, we would get our hopes up and think that it was going to come to an end, and then we would be crushed again. After the verdict, we were shocked, we were stunned, we were speechless. We were elated. I felt free. I felt that I could breathe again. The fog was lifted.
I am very grateful that Susan McBride came forward. It put the pieces together to make it make sense.
Susan McBride is my hero. What she did, how she came forward, I will forever be indebted to her and grateful.
This whole situation and my involvement with Robert Feldman really made me take a hard look at my life. I needed a change. So I moved to an area of northern Tuscany called Lunigiana in Italy. I wanted to live a simpler life in a quieter place where, knock on wood, these kinds of things don't happen so much. A place to really think and, plan the next chapter of my life.
I can't even tell you how many times a day I think about Stacy, how many times a day I want to pick up the phone and call her. I'm not whole without her. It's such a hole in my heart, in so many people's hearts.
I hear her. Sounds weird, but she had a very distinct laugh. I hear it a lot. I'm sorry. I'm sorry there wasn't more we could do or didn't know what to do. I don't know what we would have done or could have done, but I miss her tremendously.
The knock comes at 12:47 a.m., not loud, not violent, just firm enough to sound official, just quiet enough to make the house feel suddenly smaller, And inside that house, in a quiet Texas suburb where porch lights usually mean safety and midnight usually means sleep, a man who has been called uncle by children who are not his blood opens his eyes and knows, before his feet touch the floor, that something buried long ago has finally learned how to breathe again. Texas, 2001. A year that now feels like a different country. Flip phones, payphones, handwritten notes taped to refrigerators. A town that prides itself on Friday night lights and unlocked doors. A place where people wave at passing cars because they recognize them. Where nothing truly bad is supposed to happen, and when it does, it's supposed to make sense. But on a humid August morning that year, a teenage girl named Emily Harper walked out of her house to meet someone she trusted and never walked back in, and by sunset, the word missing had already begun to echo through the streets like a siren no one could shut off. Emily was 16, honor roll student, part-time job at a local diner. The kind of kid teachers described as quiet but bright. She lived with her mother and younger brother in a pale brick house at the edge of town, close enough to hear the highway at night but far enough that it felt like privacy. The morning she vanished, she left behind her backpack, her wallet, and a bed that looked slept in, sheets rumpled, alarm clock still blinking 7 o'clock. The last person to see her alive was her mother, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching Emily step outside into the Texas heat, saying she'd be back in an hour. She never was. By noon, neighbors were searching ditches. By evening, police cars lined the street. By midnight, helicopters swept their lights across fields that had never been searched for anything darker than lost cattle. The community mobilized the way small towns always do, with flyers and casseroles and whispered prayers. But under the urgency, there was confusion. Emily hadn't run away. She hadn't taken clothes or money. She hadn't argued with her mother. There was no note, no warning, just absence, sharp and immediate, like a door slammed shut. Investigators worked the case hard in the first weeks. They traced phone records. They interviewed classmates. They searched the wooded area behind the diner where Emily worked. Dogs picked up a scent near a gravel road 2 miles from her home, then lost it abruptly, as if she had stepped into a vehicle and vanished into thin air. The road led nowhere significant, just an old service path used by farmers and utility trucks. No witnesses came forward. No screams were heard. No blood was found. The case file grew thick, but the answers stayed thin. There was one name that kept appearing in interviews, over and over, spoken casually, almost affectionately. Mark Delaney. Family friend. Trusted helper. The man who fixed the Harper's fence when it leaned, who gave Emily driving tips in empty parking lots, who had known her since she was 9 years old. Mark had an alibi. Mark always had an alibi. He said he'd been home that morning, watching television, nursing a headache. No one questioned it too hard. In a town like this, trust is currency, and Mark Delaney was rich in it. Weeks turned into months. The searches slowed. The flyers faded in the sun. The phone stopped ringing. The case slipped from the front page to the back, then off the paper entirely. Emily's room stayed untouched, her posters curling at the corners, her perfume bottle half full on the dresser. Her mother slept with the light on. Her brother stopped asking questions and started avoiding mirrors because he thought he looked too much like her. The police, out of leads and under pressure to move on, labeled it what everyone feared but no one wanted to say out loud. Cold case. Years passed. Texas changed. The town grew. New families moved into old houses. Emily Harper became a name people lowered their voices to say, a cautionary story, a local legend without an ending. Detectives retired. Evidence boxes were stacked, sealed, forgotten. Mark Delaney attended barbecues. He waved at police officers. He lived his life in plain sight, the way only people who believe they are invisible truly can. And then, nearly 2 decades later, something shifted. In 2019, a newly assigned cold case unit began digitizing old files, scanning handwritten notes into databases, re-examining cases long assumed unsolvable. Emily's file was thick with paper, but thin on conclusions, which made it exactly the kind of case they were looking for. They started from the beginning, not with assumptions, but with questions. Why that morning? Why that road? Why no witnesses? They noticed things earlier investigators hadn't, or couldn't. A timeline that didn't quite align. A neighbor who remembered a vehicle idling longer than usual. A phone call placed from a landline that had never been fully traced. They went back to the evidence locker and opened boxes that smelled like dust and time. Inside, sealed and labeled, was a scrap of fabric found near the gravel road, too small to identify in 2001, too inconclusive to matter back then. In 2019, it mattered a lot. Advances in forensic technology turned fragments into stories, fibers into patterns, patterns into possibilities. The fabric didn't match Emily's clothing. It matched upholstery, the interior of a vehicle. They cross-referenced ownership records from 2001. They found a list of vehicles registered within a 5-mile radius of Emily's home. Most were long gone, junked, sold, destroyed. One stood out, a pickup truck owned by Mark Delaney. Same model, same year, the same upholstery fabric. When detectives interviewed Mark again, he smiled, the same calm smile described in old reports. He said he'd sold the truck years ago. He couldn't remember to whom. He laughed a little when they asked if they were seriously revisiting that old disappearance. It was almost charming. Almost. The investigators didn't argue. They waited. They pulled phone records again, this time with modern tools. They found something missed before. A call from Mark's landline to the Harper home the morning Emily disappeared, placed at 7:32 a.m., lasting 37 seconds. Long enough to say hello. Long enough to say, "I'm outside." Too short to say goodbye. When confronted, Mark said he didn't remember the call. He said he used to call the Harpers all the time. It meant nothing. The cold case unit thought differently. They requested a warrant. They searched what remained of Mark's old property, land he'd sold off in pieces over the years. In a shallow area near what used to be a shed, ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly. Soil that had been disturbed, then carefully replaced. They dug. What they found was not a body. It was worse. A personal item. Emily's. Something her mother had described in painstaking detail years earlier, down to the scratch on the metal and the faded sticker on the back. Proof she had been there. Proof she had not simply disappeared. The town didn't know any of this yet. Life continued as usual. People mowed lawns. Kids rode bikes. Mark Delaney attended a neighbor's birthday party the same week investigators quietly finished building their case. And then came a knock at 12:47 a.m., the sound that slices a life cleanly in two. Police cars filled the street. Lights flashed against familiar walls. Mark was handcuffed in his doorway, barefoot, blinking into the brightness. A trusted family friend. A man everyone thought they knew. Arrested in a midnight raid. The news hit the community like a controlled explosion. Shock, disbelief, anger. The name Emily Harper was everywhere again, printed in bold letters, spoken on evening broadcasts, typed into search bars by people who had thought the story was over. But the questions came fast, and the answers did not. Mark Delaney was charged, yes, but he said nothing. No confession. No explanation. No location of a body. The cold case was reopened, but it was not resolved. Because an arrest is not an ending. Not in cases like this. Emily is still missing. Her remains have never been found. Her last moments exist only in fragments and inference, in phone calls and fibers and soil. And in Texas, in a town that learned too late how thin the line between trust and terror can be, the night still feels different now. Quieter. Heavier. As if the air itself remembers a girl who walked out of her house one morning and never made it home, and a truth that waited nearly 20 years to knock. The silence after the arrest is louder than the sirens were, a vacuum that settles over the town like a held breath, because once the handcuffs click and headlines explode, everyone expects the truth to finally pour out, and when it doesn't, when Mark Delaney says nothing, offers nothing, explains nothing, the reopened cold case begins to feel less like a breakthrough and more like a deeper descent into uncertainty. Prosecutors lay out what they have with clinical precision, a mosaic built from fragments, timelines tightened until there's barely room to breathe, but defense attorneys attack the gaps with surgical focus, pointing out what's missing, what's assumed, what's inferred, and in the absence of a body, absence becomes their sharpest weapon. The courtroom fills with people who haven't seen each other in years, former classmates, neighbors who once volunteered to search fields together, all sitting shoulder to shoulder as if proximity might somehow manufacture closure. Emily Harper's mother takes the front row every day, clutching a folder of photographs so worn at the edges they look like relics, her eyes never leaving the man she once trusted enough to let into her home. Mark Delaney avoids her gaze. He stares straight ahead, jaw set, hands folded, a posture that reads as calm to some and cold to others. Outside, television vans idle, engines humming, reporters rehearsing lines about shock and betrayal, a community reeling, words that sound dramatic but still somehow inadequate. Investigators testify about the call from Mark's landline, about the fiber analysis, about the personal item recovered from the ground, and the defense counters with experts of their own, people who talk about contamination and coincidence, about how technology has limits, about how memory degrades over time. They remind the jury that no one saw Emily get into Mark's truck, that no one heard her scream, that the road where her scent vanished is accessible to anyone with a vehicle and a reason to be discreet. They ask again and again the same devastating question. Where is the body? Behind the scenes, detectives work with a different kind of urgency. They re-interview witnesses who are now middle-aged, asking them to remember a single morning from 2 decades earlier, to recall the sound of an engine, the color of a truck, the exact time they glanced out a window. Some memories sharpen under pressure. Others crumble. One neighbor recalls a pickup parked near the gravel road longer than usual, engine idling, radio faintly audible. Another says it was a different day entirely. A former classmate remembers Emily mentioning she was going to meet someone she trusted, but can't remember the name. Trust, once again, becomes the axis around which everything turns. The cold case unit expands its search, combing through property records, mapping every parcel of land Mark Delaney ever owned, rented, borrowed, or accessed. They bring in cadaver dogs, deploy drones, excavate spots that look promising from the air and disappointing on the ground. Each dig draws a crowd, people standing behind yellow tape, hoping and dreading in equal measure. Every hole that comes up empty deepens the sense of something unresolved, something deliberately hidden. The longer they search without success, the more the case feels like it's slipping back into the shadows it briefly escaped. Inside the jail, Mark Delaney lives on a schedule dictated by lights and counts, stripped of the casual freedoms he once took for granted. He makes a single phone call to his attorney. He declines interviews. He eats, sleeps, waits. The prosecutors hope time will work in their favor, that pressure will crack him, that guilt will surface in the small hours when bravado fades. But Mark is patient. He has been patient for years. His silence becomes its own kind of statement, one that infuriates Emily's family and unsettles the town. People begin to ask questions they never allowed themselves to ask before. How well did we really know him? How many times did we mistake familiarity for safety? As the trial approaches, the defense files motions to suppress evidence, arguing that the search of Mark's former property was flawed, that the warrant was based on outdated assumptions, that the recovered item proves nothing definitive. Each motion is a potential fault line, threatening to fracture the case before it ever reaches a jury. The judge listens, weighs arguments, issues rulings that send ripples through both sides' strategies. The prosecution tightens its narrative, focusing on opportunity, on access, on the chilling normalcy of the relationship between Mark and Emily. The defense doubles down on doubt, reminding anyone who will listen that suspicion is not proof. The town watches, divided in ways it never expected. Some residents stand firmly with Emily's family, convinced that justice has simply been delayed, not denied. Others whisper about overreach, about a rush to judgment fueled by grief and hindsight. Friendships strain under the weight of opposing beliefs. Social media amplifies every rumor, every theory, every half-remembered detail, turning private speculation into public spectacle. Emily's name trends alongside Mark's, the two forever linked now, a pairing that feels obscene to those who loved her. In a move that surprises nearly everyone, investigators announce a new search area, land miles outside town that Mark once visited regularly for reasons that were never documented. It's rugged, uneven terrain, the kind of place where the earth keeps secrets easily. Excavation equipment arrives at dawn. The air buzzes with anticipation. Cameras roll. For hours, crews dig, sift, scan. The sun climbs, sweat soaks through shirts, and then, late in the afternoon, work stops. Something has been found. Not remains, but something that suggests proximity, presence, possibility. Enough to reignite hope. Not enough to end the nightmare. Emily's mother watches from behind the tape, her hands shaking, her expression caught between yearning and exhaustion. She has lived in this limbo for so long that the idea of certainty, Even terrible certainty feels almost foreign. Reporters speculate. Experts debate. The prosecutors amend their filings. The defense adjusts its tone, more cautious now, more deliberate. The case inches forward, but the finish line remains out of sight. At night, the town is restless. Porch lights stay on longer. People lock doors they once left open. Conversations trail off when someone mentions 2001. The reopened cold case has done more than resurrect old pain. It has exposed the fragility of the assumptions everyone built their lives around. The idea that danger is always obvious, always external, always marked by warning signs, has been quietly dismantled. And through it all, the central question hangs unanswered, heavy as humidity in the Texas air. What happened to Emily Harper after she stepped into that morning light? The evidence suggests a path, points a finger, narrows the possibilities, but it does not speak. Not yet. The trial date looms. The search continues. And in a community still grappling with the idea that the familiar could be the most frightening thing of all, the reopened cold case tightens its grip, refusing to let go, reminding everyone that some truths, once buried, do not stay quiet forever, and some silences are louder than any confession. By the time the trial date is set, the town no longer feels like a place on a map, but like a pressure chamber sealed and waiting, because everyone understands that whatever happens next will not simply determine the fate of one man. It will rewrite the story they've been telling themselves for more than 20 years. The courthouse becomes the gravitational center of daily life. People plan lunch breaks around testimony schedules. Local radio hosts speak in hushed tones between commercials, careful not to sound accusatory, careful not to sound naive. The words cold case stop feeling clinical and start feeling personal, as if the term itself has learned the names of the streets it haunts. Jury selection is slow, methodical, painful. Nearly everyone knows Emily Harper's name. Many knew her face. Some knew Mark Delaney well enough to have shaken his hand, shared a beer, trusted him with their kids. Each potential juror is asked the same questions over and over. Can you be impartial? Can you set aside what you think you know? Can you live with uncertainty? Some say yes and mean it. Others say yes because they don't know how to say no. By the time 12 are seated, they look less like arbiters of truth and more like people bracing for impact. Opening statements don't bring closure. They bring collision. The prosecution paints a picture of opportunity wrapped in trust, of a man who didn't need to force his way into Emily's life because he was already there, a presence so familiar it never triggered alarm bells. They talk about the phone call, the fibers, the recovered item, the way Emily's scent ended abruptly as if she had stepped willingly into a vehicle. The defense responds with restraint, emphasizing restraint, reminding the jury that stories can be convincing even when they're wrong, that narrative is not evidence, that coincidence can masquerade as design when viewed through the lens of grief. Witnesses take the stand. Emily's former teachers describe her potential, her kindness, the way she helped other students without being asked. Friends talk about plans she made for the future, colleges she wanted to visit, places she never got to see. Each testimony sharpens the absence at the center of the case, making it harder to ignore and impossible to fill. When Emily's mother testifies, the courtroom feels like it might fracture under the weight of her words. She speaks about the morning Emily left, about the sound of the door closing, about waiting for a call that never came. She does not look at Mark Delaney. She doesn't have to. Then the experts return, armed with charts and diagrams, timelines projected onto screens, data points arranged to suggest inevitability. The prosecution's forensic analyst explains how the fibers found in the soil match the upholstery of Mark's truck, how the probability of coincidence narrows when context is applied. The defense's expert counters with statistical caution, talking about shared manufacturing runs, about the danger of overstating certainty. The jury watches, trying to translate numbers into meaning into truth. Outside the courtroom, the investigation continues in parallel, quieter now, less public, but no less intense. Detectives follow a tip from an anonymous caller who claims to have seen Mark near a remote creek years ago, acting strangely, digging for reasons no one questioned at the time. They search the area, finding signs of disturbance that could be natural, could be human, could be nothing at all. Each possibility carries its own emotional toll. Every time hope rises, fear follows close behind. Inside the jail, Mark Delaney's routine remains unchanged. He reads. He sleeps. He waits. Guards report nothing remarkable, nothing incriminating. He does not lash out. He does not crumble. To some, his composure suggests innocence. To others, it feels rehearsed, the calm of someone who has already made peace with what he's done. His attorney advises silence, and Mark complies with an obedience that feels deliberate. Midway through the trial, the prosecution introduces a piece of evidence that shifts the air in the room. A newly analyzed audio recording from a neighbor's answering machine recorded the morning Emily disappeared, capturing background noise from the street. It's faint, barely intelligible, but experts testify that the sound matches the engine of a pickup truck idling, followed by a door closing. The defense immediately challenges the analysis, questioning the chain of custody, the quality of the recording, the subjectivity of interpretation. The judge allows it with caution. The jury listens, straining to hear meaning in static, aware that what they think they hear could matter more than what's actually there. The media seizes on the development. Headlines grow bolder. Commentators speculate. Social feeds light up with slowed-down clips, amateur analyses, people arguing over what sounds like what, each convinced their ears are more reliable than anyone else's. The town feels watched, judged, exposed, as if its collective trauma has been turned into consumable content. Emily's family retreats inward, avoiding cameras, leaning on each other as the outside world dissects their pain frame by frame. As closing arguments approach, the defense makes its most aggressive move yet, filing a motion to dismiss based on insufficient evidence. They argue that the case rests on inference stacked on inference, that without a body, without direct proof of harm, the state is asking the jury to convict on emotion rather than fact. The prosecution counters with urgency, reminding the court that absence can be evidence, that silence can be deliberate, that predators often hide behind normalcy. The judge denies the motion, but the tension lingers, a reminder of how precarious the case really is. Closing arguments are delivered with measured intensity. The prosecution asks the jury to look at the totality of the evidence, to see the pattern that emerges when pieces are viewed together rather than in isolation. The defense asks them to resist that urge, to hold each piece up separately and ask whether it truly proves what the state claims. Both sides invoke Emily's name, but in different ways. One is a call for justice, the other as a warning against letting tragedy cloud judgment. When the jury is sent to deliberate, the courtroom empties slowly, people standing in clusters, whispering, speculating, trying to read meaning into facial expressions that reveal nothing. Deliberations stretch into hours, then days. Questions are sent to the judge. Clarifications requested. Evidence reviewed again and again. Each minute feels elastic, stretched thin by expectation. Finally, the verdict comes back. The jury files in, faces solemn, eyes forward. The foreperson stands, voice steady, hands trembling just enough to notice. The decision is read. Not guilty. The words land with a dull thud, not an explosion, not a gasp, just a quiet, devastating finality. Emily's mother closes her eyes. Mark Delaney exhales. The courtroom dissolves into motion, voices rising, reporters rushing, deputies escorting. Mark Delaney walks out of the courthouse a free man, legally cleared, though nothing about his freedom feels clean. Outside, cameras flash, questions are shouted, accusations fly. He says nothing. He gets into a car and drives away, disappearing once more into the fabric of ordinary life. The cold case remains open. Emily Harper is still missing. The trial has answered a legal question but left the human one untouched. The evidence still points. The silence still screams. And in Texas, in a town that has now watched the justice system strain and bend without breaking through, the unease deepens because the verdict has not brought peace, only the unsettling knowledge that the truth may be out there still, buried, waiting patient, just like the man who walked free under a sky that has not forgotten what happened beneath it. After the verdict, the town doesn't celebrate and it doesn't riot. It simply exhales a long, shaky breath that leaves everyone feeling strangely hollow. Because acquittal is not absolution and freedom is not clarity, and the space where answers should be remains stubbornly empty. Mark Delaney returns to a life that looks normal from a distance but feels warped up close. Neighbors watching from behind curtains, conversations stopping when he enters a room, the weight of suspicion clinging to him like humidity. He shops for groceries at off hours. He avoids eye contact. He moves through the days with the caution of someone who knows that being found not guilty does not mean being believed. For Emily Harper's family, the verdict is not an ending, but a rupture. Her mother packs away the photographs she brought to court, not because she's giving up, but because she can't stand to see them framed by legal defeat. The cold case unit remains officially active, though its resources are thinner now, its mandate quieter. Detectives are reassigned. Leads are triaged, but the file labeled Emily Harper is not closed, and that distinction matters more than it seems. It means the question still lives. It means the search has not been declared futile. In the weeks that follow, something unexpected happens. Tips begin to arrive. Not the frantic, speculative calls that follow the arrest, but slow, deliberate messages from people who have clearly thought long and hard before speaking. A former coworker of Mark's calls to say he once overheard a disturbing joke made years ago about people who disappear and never come back. A woman who lived near one of Mark's old properties remembers seeing him burn trash late at night more than once, long after everyone else had gone to bed. Each tip is small, unprovable on its own, but together they form a pattern of unease that investigators can't ignore. The cold case unit begins working in the margins, using what little leverage they have left. They subpoena old financial records, looking for unexplained transactions. They re-examine travel logs, fuel purchases, anything that might place Mark somewhere unexpected in the days following Emily's disappearance. It's painstaking work, made harder by the passage of time, but occasionally something glints. A gas station receipt from a county far outside his normal routine. A motel charge that doesn't align with any known trip. The dates hovered close to August 2001, close enough to raise eyebrows, not close enough to convict. Meanwhile, Mark Delaney tries to reclaim his routine, but the town resists him. Invitations stop coming. Friendly nods turn into stiff acknowledgments. Children are quietly pulled away when he passes. The trust that once shielded him is gone, replaced by a silence that feels more dangerous than open hostility. He considers moving, talks about it to the few people who still speak to him, but something keeps him rooted, a stubborn attachment to the place where his life, whatever its truth, is anchored. Late one evening, nearly a year after the trial, a fire breaks out on a piece of land Mark sold long ago, a narrow strip of property now owned by a distant relative of his. The blaze is small, contained quickly, but when firefighters dig through the scorched earth to ensure nothing is smoldering beneath the surface, they find something that doesn't belong there. Not bones. Not yet. But a concentration of personal debris, items buried together, deliberately, as if someone wanted them close but hidden. Among them is an object that once sat on Emily Harper's dresser. The discovery is kept quiet at first, shared only among investigators and the district attorney's office. The legal implications are thorny. Double jeopardy looms large. Mark Delaney cannot be tried again for the same charge unless new evidence fundamentally alters the case. This might be that evidence, but it has to be handled with precision. Forensic teams are brought in, the soil carefully cataloged, every fragment photographed and logged. The question is no longer whether Emily was there. It's why and what happened next. As word inevitably leaks, the town's unease sharpens into something more volatile. People who once defended Mark go quiet. Those who always believed in his guilt feel vindicated but not satisfied. Emily's mother is informed privately, sitting at the same kitchen table she once watched her daughter leave. She listens without speaking, hands folded, eyes fixed on a spot on the wall, absorbing the news as if it's both a blow and a lifeline. It's proof of a kind. Not of death, but of proximity. Of intention. Investigators request a grand jury review, laying out the newly uncovered evidence, arguing that it fundamentally changes the landscape of the case. Mark's attorney pushes back, calling it harassment, a refusal to accept a verdict. The legal battle unfolds mostly out of sight, in filings and closed-door hearings, but its tension seeps into the community. Everyone understands what's at stake. Another chance at justice. Another chance at failure. Mark Delaney is questioned again, this time without the protective shield of a pending trial. He listens, expression unreadable, and when asked about the items found in the burned ground, he shrugs, says he can't control what previous owners did with their land. His answers are careful, lawyered, designed to reveal nothing. When the interview ends, he walks out without looking back, leaving behind a room that feels colder than when he entered. As months pass, the grand jury deliberates, and the cold case stretches on, its reopened wounds refusing to heal. The search for Emily intensifies, expanding outward, guided by the faint trail of newly discovered evidence. Cadaver dogs alert in areas previously dismissed. Excavations resume. Each dig is a gamble, each empty patch of dirt a reminder of how easily the truth can stay hidden. At night, Emily's name drifts through the town like a ghost, spoken softly, sometimes angrily, sometimes with hope that feels dangerous to hold. The case has become a mirror, reflecting the community's deepest fears about trust, about time, about the idea that even when the system does everything it's supposed to do, something essential can still slip through its fingers. And somewhere in that town, Mark Delaney sleeps, wakes, moves through his days, carrying a verdict that says one thing and a history that suggests another, while the cold case, stubborn and patient, waits for the moment when silence finally becomes too heavy to bear. The waiting becomes its own kind of punishment, a slow grind measured not in days but in glances and pauses, because once the grand jury is convened, everything feels provisional, as if the town itself is suspended between two truths, neither of which can fully surface. Investigators keep working without the reassurance of momentum, following threads that refuse to tighten into knots, revisiting places already searched, listening again to recordings already dissected, hoping repetition will reveal what novelty never did. The cold case hums beneath the surface of daily life, an electrical current you can't see but always feel. Emily Harper's mother marks time by rituals. Coffee at dawn, a walk past the empty bedroom, a box of letters she never sends. She attends every private briefing investigators will allow, listening as they describe soil composition, burn patterns, probability ranges, the language of professionals trained to distance themselves from pain. She nods, asks careful questions, absorbs every detail, because details are all she has left to hold. Some nights she dreams of Emily calling from an unfamiliar number, voice distorted, asking for help. She wakes up before she can answer. The grand jury process is opaque by design, but rumors leak anyway. Someone's cousin knows someone who testified. A clerk's neighbor swears the evidence is overwhelming. Another insists it's thin, circumstantial doomed. The uncertainty breeds speculation, and speculation hardens into camps. Yard signs appear, not slogans but symbols, ribbons, and dates that quietly declare allegiance. The town doesn't fracture loudly. It splinters and whispers. Mark Delaney keeps a low profile, but low profile does not mean invisible. He's seen in a hardware store, buying rope, and the sight alone fuels a week of talk. He is spotted driving past the old gravel road, and someone posts a grainy photo online, circled in red, as if movement itself is incriminating. He hires a private investigator, a move that reads as prudence to some and paranoia to others. When asked why, he says nothing, but his attorney releases a statement about harassment, about the right to rebuild a life. The words land flat. Rights feel abstract when the missing remain missing. One afternoon, a tip comes in that shifts the investigation laterally rather than forward. A retired utility worker calls to say he remembers a service call near the creek years ago, a broken line reported by a man matching Mark's description. The call was logged, the repair completed, the paperwork filed and forgotten. The location, however, aligns with a patch of land never fully searched, dismissed early on as too rocky, too unstable. Investigators drive out, walk the perimeter, notice subtle depressions in the ground that could be natural or could be something else entirely. They bring in equipment. They wait. The excavation is slower than anyone wants. The ground resists, packed hard, threaded with roots. The crew works methodically, aware that haste can destroy the very thing they're hoping to find. Hours stretch. The sun dips. Then a dog alerts, brief, sharp signal that sends a ripple through everyone watching. The dig continues, careful, reverent now. They find fragments. Not enough to declare anything definitive. Enough to demand testing. The samples are bagged, labeled, sent away. The wait begins again. Forensic timelines are cruel. Days pass, then weeks. Results come back inconclusive, degraded by time and environment, offering probabilities instead of answers. The fragments are human. That much is clear. Whether they belong to Emily Harper is not. The news is delivered gently, as if tone could soften the blow. Emily's mother thanks the investigator for their honesty and goes home to sit in a quiet house that feels suddenly enormous. The possibility of an ending has been dangled and pulled away, leaving behind a sharper ache than before. The grand jury reconvenes. Testimony resumes. Experts explain what the fragments mean and what they don't. The legal threshold looms large, a line drawn not by emotion but by precedent. Prosecutors argue that the newly discovered evidence establishes a pattern of concealment, that it fundamentally alters the narrative presented at trial. The defense counters with precision, warning against desperation disguised as diligence, against the temptation to see intention where chance may suffice. The jurors listen, faces unreadable, bound by secrecy even as the weight of their role presses in. As winter approaches, the town's patience thins. People want resolution, not for spectacle, but for relief. They want to know whether to keep locking doors with a certain thought in mind, whether to stop scanning familiar faces for unfamiliar shadows. Churches hold vigils that blur into protests, candles flickering as speakers invoke Emily's name, the date she vanished, the years that followed. Each flame feels like a small act of defiance against forgetting. Mark Delaney attends none of it. He spends more time indoors, curtains drawn, television murmuring in the background. Those who still speak to him say he seems tired, older than his years, the confidence he once carried replaced by something brittle. Others say it's an act, another layer of performance. The truth, whatever it is, remains locked behind his silence. Late one night, an investigator reviewing old evidence notices something that had seemed insignificant before, a marginal note in a report about a storage unit rented briefly in 2001, paid in cash, canceled within weeks. The unit was cleared long ago, its contents discarded. But the location matters. It sits between a Harper home and a gravel road, a liminal space that fits the morning timeline too well to ignore. The investigator digs deeper, pulls surveillance archives from neighboring businesses that no longer exist, finds a single still image saved on a forgotten backup. It's grainy, time-stamped, barely legible. A pickup truck. A familiar shape. The driver's face is obscured, but the angle of the turn, the position of the sun, the time on the clock align with chilling precision. The discovery is presented quietly to the prosecution. It's not a smoking gun. It's another piece. But pieces accumulate, and accumulation changes calculus. The district attorney convenes a meeting, weighs the risk, the possibility of another acquittal, the impact on a family already exhausted by hope. They decide to wait for the grand jury's direction, to let the process speak. When the grand jury finally reaches a decision, it does so without fanfare. An indictment is issued on new charges, narrower, more specific, designed to navigate the narrow channel left by the previous verdict. The announcement lands like a low thunderclap, not explosive but unmistakable. Mark Delaney is arrested again, this time without cameras, without spectacle, taken in quietly as if the system itself has learned the value of restraint. The town absorbs the news with a wary calm. No cheers, no outrage, just a collective acknowledgement that the story is not finished, that the cold case refuses to be relegated to the past. Emily Harper's mother receives the call and sits down, steadying herself against the table. She closes her eyes and breathes, not in triumph but in preparation. Another chapter. Another wait. As Mark is processed, fingerprinted, photographed, the machinery of justice turns once more, slower now, more cautious, aware of its own fallibility. The evidence will be challenged. The silence will be tested. The truth, if it exists in a form that can be proven, will have to fight its way through layers of doubt and delay. And somewhere beneath the town, beneath the roads and the routines, the ground holds what holds, indifferent to urgency, patient beyond measure, while the cold case advances inch by inch, driven by the stubborn belief that even after years of darkness, something buried can still be brought into the light. The second arrest doesn't feel like déjà vu. It feels heavier, as if the air itself remembers what happened the first time and refuses to be fooled again. There are no flashing lights, no midnight sirens this time, just paperwork, quiet footsteps, a car pulling away from a curb without an audience. Mark Delaney's name appears in the system again, now attached to narrower charges, framed with language sharpened by experience, and the town absorbs it with a cautious stillness, the kind that comes from learning that hope, when mishandled, can bruise. Inside the prosecutor's office, the mood is disciplined, almost austere. No one talks about redemption or closure. They talk about thresholds, admissibility, what can be proved and what must be left unsaid. The evidence is laid out again, reordered, recontextualized. The storage unit image is treated like fragile glass, handled sparingly, always with gloves. The burn ground evidence is parsed down to what it can support without collapsing under scrutiny. Every decision is filtered through a single, relentless question. Will this hold? The defense responds immediately, filing motions that arrive thick and fast, challenging jurisdiction, intent, relevance. They argue that the new charges are a semantic maneuver, an attempt to repackage the same story and sell it twice. They warn of precedent, of erosion, of a justice system bending itself into a shape it doesn't recognize. The language is polished, persuasive, designed to remind everyone that restraint is not weakness, that the law's power comes from its limits. Emily Harper's mother listens to these arguments secondhand, filtered through briefings and careful explanations. She has learned to translate legal language into emotional reality, to understand that a motion denied is not a victory, that a motion granted is not a defeat. She focuses on what she can control. She agrees to another interview. She answers the same questions again, describing the same morning again, her voice steady, her memory precise. Each retelling feels like sanding down a nerve, but she does it anyway, because silence has never helped. The cold case unit expands its scope one more time, casting a wider net not because it expects a sudden miracle, but because patterns sometimes emerge only when you stop looking for them. They revisit Mark Delaney's social circle from 2001, not just close friends, but acquaintances, people who crossed his path briefly and then disappeared from his life. One name surfaces repeatedly, a contractor who worked odd jobs for Mark around the time Emily vanished, a man who moved out of state shortly afterward, leaving behind unpaid bills and vague explanations. Detectives track him down in a different county, older now, guarded, his memory selective. He claims he doesn't remember much. Then, under sustained questioning, he remembers more than he expected. He talks about a job near the creek, about being paid in cash, about being asked not to ask questions. He says he thought it was strange at the time, but not strange enough to refuse the money. When asked what Mark was doing while he worked, he hesitates. Says Mark kept watch. Says he seemed nervous. Says he remembers thinking it felt like something that needed hiding. The statement is recorded, corroborated where possible, weighed carefully. It's not proof. It's context. And context, in a case like this, can be everything. In pretrial hearings, the judge listens with the patience of someone who knows how thin the margin for error has become. Rulings are issued narrowly, line by line, allowing some evidence, excluding other pieces, shaping the battlefield on which the next phase will be fought. The courtroom feels smaller now, less theatrical, more surgical. The stakes are understood by everyone present, spoken and unspoken. Mark Delaney sits at the defense table again, posture familiar, expression composed. He looks thinner. His hair has gone noticeably gray. When he scans the room, his gaze still avoids Emily's family. But now there's something else there, a flicker that could be irritation, could be fatigue, could be fear. He confers with his attorney in low tones, nods occasionally, never reacting when Emily's name is spoken aloud. To some observers, the restraint reads as discipline. To others, as something rehearsed to the point of habit. Outside the courthouse, the media presence is muted. Reporters still come, but the tone has changed. The easy narratives have burned out. What remains is complexity, and complexity doesn't fit neatly into a headline. The words cold case appear less often now, replaced by phrases like legal maneuvering and procedural hurdles. The public appetite for spectacle wanes, replaced by a quieter, more uncomfortable engagement. People want this resolved, but they've learned that wanting doesn't make it so. As winter deepens, investigators receive results from a new round of testing on the fragments recovered near the creek. Advances in methodology allow for a narrower comparison, a probabilistic match that stops just short of certainty. The report is cautious, precise, maddeningly careful. It suggests a high likelihood. It avoids absolutes. The prosecutors debate how to use it, whether to introduce it at all, knowing that overreach could undo years of work. They decide to include it, framed exactly as it is, neither inflated nor diminished. The defense seizes on the ambiguity, preparing cross-examinations designed to turn caution into doubt, doubt into dismissal. They rehearse questions that emphasize margins of error, environmental degradation, the difference between likely and proven. They remind themselves, and anyone who will listen, that the law does not convict on likelihood. Emily's mother attends a vigil one cold evening, standing among others who have gathered quietly, candles flickering in the dark. No speeches this time. No chants. Just names read aloud, one by one, a litany of the missing. When Emily's name is spoken, the flame in her mother's hand wavers but doesn't go out. It feels symbolic, though she would never say so aloud. She has learned to distrust symbols. As the next court date approaches, the town settles into a familiar tension, one it hoped never to feel again but now recognizes as part of the landscape. Conversations are careful. Expectations are tempered. People brace themselves not for revelation, but for endurance. And beneath it all, the case continues to exert its gravity, pulling memories, evidence, and people back into its orbit. Mark Delaney remains silent. The ground remains mute. The truth, if it is there in full, stays fragmented, scattered across years and locations and half-remembered moments. But the cold case has changed. It is no longer dormant. It is active, restless, pressing forward not with certainty, but with persistence, inching closer to a point where silence may finally fail, and whatever has been buried for decades will be forced, at last, to choose between staying hidden and being known. The new trial begins without ceremony, as if everyone involved understands that spectacle has no place here anymore, that this phase is about precision, not drama, and the courtroom reflects that shift, stripped of excess, focused, the atmosphere taut with the knowledge that one misstep could collapse everything that's been built. The charges are read in careful language, narrower than before, designed to avoid the traps of the past, and when Mark Delaney enters his plea, his voice is steady, almost flat, a sound that carries no information and gives nothing away. The prosecution opens by reframing the story, not as a single act but as a sequence of choices, each one small enough to rationalize, together forming a path that leads inexorably to loss. They speak about access, about familiarity, about how trust can function as a key that opens doors without leaving marks. They do not overreach. They do not promise answers they can't deliver. Instead, they ask the jury to consider probability and context, to weigh patterns rather than search for a single, definitive moment. The defense counters with a familiar refrain, sharpened by experience. They remind the jury that probability is not proof, that context can be shaped to fit almost any conclusion, that the absence of a body is not a technicality but a fundamental gap. They caution against letting sympathy do the work of evidence. The words land differently this time, not because they are weaker, but because the room has heard them before and knows what they cost. Witnesses take the stand again, but their testimony has evolved. Time has altered memories, sharpened some, dulled others. The retired contractor testifies, voice rough, hands trembling slightly as he describes the job near the creek, the cash payment, the sense that something was being concealed. The defense presses him hard, questioning his motives, his memory, the timing of his revelation. Why now? Why not before? He answers honestly. Fear. Indifference. The belief that it wasn't his problem. The answers don't absolve him, but they resonate with a jury that understands how easy it is to look away. The forensic experts follow, presenting the latest analysis of the fragments, the fibers, the burn patterns. They speak in measured tones, careful to stay within the bounds of what the science can support. The prosecution resists the urge to dramatize, letting the accumulation speak for itself. The defense exploits every caveat, every margin, every conditional phrase, turning caution into a wedge. The jury listens, scribbling notes, faces intent, aware that certainty is not on offer here. Midway through the trial, a moment of tension ripples through the courtroom when the prosecution introduces the storage unit evidence, the time-stamped image placed precisely within the morning window of Emily's disappearance. The defense objects, arguing relevance, prejudice, insufficiency. The judge overrules, allowing the image with strict limitations. The jury studies the grainy still, trying to extract meaning from pixels and shadows. It's a vehicle. It's a time. It's a place. It's also, frustratingly, not a face. Outside, the town watches with a restraint learned the hard way. There are no daily updates posted on storefront chalkboards, no breathless radio countdowns. People check the news quietly, talk about it in low voices, as if volume itself might jinx the outcome. The case has taught them that loud certainty often collapses under its own weight. Inside the jail, Mark Delaney's demeanor remains unchanged. He confers with his attorney, listens, nods. He does not testify. The decision is strategic, expected, but it still leaves a void that the jury can't help but notice. The judge reminds them not to draw conclusions from silence, but silence has a presence of its own, especially when it has lasted for decades. As closing arguments approach, the prosecution tightens its focus even further, stripping away anything that could be seen as excess. They speak about Emily Harper as a person, not a symbol, grounding her in the specifics of her life, her routines, her plans. They argue that while the law demands restraint, it does not demand blindness, that patterns, when consistent and corroborated, are not coincidence. The defense responds with equal discipline, warning against the seductive power of a story that feels complete even when it isn't, reminding the jury that doubt, when reasonable, must prevail. Deliberations begin again, slower this time, more deliberate. The jury requests transcripts. They replay testimony. They ask questions that reveal both engagement and uncertainty. Hours pass, then days. The courthouse settles into a familiar rhythm of waiting, the kind that stretches nerves thin and makes every phone buzz feel consequential. During the wait, investigators receive a call that doesn't fit the timeline of the trial but refuses to be ignored. A hiker, exploring a rarely visited stretch of land far from town, reports finding a shallow depression and something that looks out of place. The area is secured quietly, without fanfare, the search conducted under the radar to avoid influencing the jury. What they find is carefully documented, bagged, sent for analysis. The results will not arrive in time to matter here. Everyone involved understands that. The case, once again, outpaces the courtroom. The jury returns late on the third day. Faces are drawn, eyes tired. The foreperson stands. The verdict is read. Guilty on one count. Not guilty on another. A partial conviction that lands with a strange mix of relief and frustration. Mark Delaney's expression tightens for the first time, a subtle shift that doesn't escape notice. Emily's mother closes her eyes, not in celebration, not in despair, but in something that looks like release. Sentencing is scheduled for a later date. Appeals are inevitable. The legal process grinds on. But the partial conviction changes the landscape. It establishes responsibility without delivering completeness. It affirms suspicion without resolving mystery. The town absorbs the outcome slowly, cautiously. Some feel vindicated. Others feel uneasy. Everyone understands that the story is still unfinished. Emily Harper is still missing. The ground has not given up its secrets. The hiker's discovery waits in a lab, silent but promising. And as Mark Delaney is led away, no longer entirely free, no longer entirely condemned, the cold case enters a new phase, one defined not by headlines or shock, but by endurance, by the long, patient work of uncovering what remains hidden, and by the uneasy knowledge that even a verdict, even a conviction, does not necessarily tell the whole truth. Sentencing does not arrive with thunder. It arrives with paperwork and calendar notices, with a quiet understanding that what's about to happen will matter legally far more than it will emotionally, because no number of years can translate into a location, a last moment, a goodbye. Mark Delaney stands before the judge weeks later, hands folded, shoulders squared, listening as the court recounts the narrow conviction, the limits of what has been proven, the boundaries of what punishment can address. The sentence is firm but measured, shaped by statutes and precedent rather than outrage. When it's read aloud, there is no gasp, no outcry, just the low murmur of a room absorbing something irreversible yet incomplete. Emily Harper's mother listens without reacting, her face still, eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the bench. She has learned not to attach hope to moments like this. The sentence closes one door and leaves 10 others ajar. Mark Delaney is led away again, this time with a destination and a number, not freedom but not the full weight many expected. Outside, cameras capture the ritual of departure, but the footage feels muted, drained of its former urgency. Justice, when it comes in fragments, rarely photographs well. The appeal is filed almost immediately, a predictable next step that nonetheless lands like a reminder that nothing here is finished. Legal briefs circulate, dense with citations and carefully chosen language, arguing errors, interpretations, the fine line between inference and proof. The prosecution prepares its response, aware that the partial conviction must survive scrutiny if it's to mean anything at all. The case settles into a slower rhythm, one dictated by appellate timelines rather than human impatience. Behind the scenes, the investigation continues, now unshackled from the immediate demands of trial. The hiker's discovery becomes the quiet center of gravity. The site is remote, difficult to access, the kind of place that doesn't invite casual visitors. Forensic teams return, working methodically, expanding the search grid, documenting every layer of soil. They find more fragments, more signs of disturbance, enough to suggest intent, not accident. The remains are incomplete, scattered, altered by time and environment, but they tell a story the courtroom could not yet hear. Laboratory results arrive in stages, each one parsed carefully before being shared. The probability increases. The margins narrow. A profile begins to form that aligns with Emily Harper in ways that are no longer easily dismissed. Still, the language remains cautious, hedged, professional. Science offers likelihood, not certainty, and the investigators know better than to promise what cannot be delivered. But for the first time in years, the possibility of answering the central question feels tangible, not aspirational. When Emily's mother is informed, it's done privately, without ceremony. She listens, asks the same question she has asked for decades, and this time the answer is closer to what she has been bracing for. Not definitive, not complete, but closer. She sits quietly for a long time after the call ends, letting the information settle, letting the weight of it press in. Grief, when delayed, does not diminish. It concentrates. The town hears about the discovery gradually, through careful statements and restrained headlines. There is no appetite for sensationalism now. The community has aged with the case, learned what premature certainty costs. People talk about Emily again, but differently, with less speculation and more reverence. The story is no longer just about a suspect or a verdict. It's about a girl whose absence shaped a generation. Mark Delaney, now in custody, becomes aware of the renewed search through legal channels and filtered reports. His attorney visits, updates him, discusses implications. Mark listens, expression unreadable, asks few questions. Those who observe him note a change, subtle but unmistakable, a tension beneath the composure, as if the walls have moved closer. He maintains his silence, a strategy that has served him for years, but the silence now feels strained, less like control and more like containment. Investigators revisit old interviews with new context in mind, listening for what was said and what wasn't, for pauses that now carry weight. They re-examine Mark's movements in the weeks after Emily vanished, mapping routes, cross-referencing with newly identified sites. The picture that emerges is not clean or linear, but it is consistent in its implications. The creek, the storage unit, the burned ground, the remote site found by chance. Separate locations connected by a single through line. As the appellate process unfolds, legal experts debate the implications of introducing new evidence after conviction, the potential for additional charges, the constraints imposed by earlier proceedings. The conversations are technical, abstract, but they orbit a very real possibility. The case could expand again, or it could collapse under its own complexity. Both outcomes feel plausible. Neither feels just. Emily Harper's mother begins to prepare for something she once thought impossible, a memorial that might include remains. She does not announce this publicly. She does not choose a date. She simply allows herself to imagine a place where grief could finally land. The thought brings both comfort and terror. To know is to lose hope of return, but to not know has been its own kind of loss. In the quiet hours, the cold case unit reflects on the arc of the investigation, not with pride, but with a sober awareness of its limits. They talk about what might have been done differently in 2001, about resources that didn't exist, about assumptions that went unchallenged. They understand that even if everything had gone right, the truth might still have taken decades to surface. Some truths, they know now, are not impatient. As winter gives way to spring, the lab delivers a report that changes the tone of every conversation. The latest analysis reaches a threshold that allows investigators to speak with more confidence than ever before. The remains are consistent with Emily Harper. The wording is careful, legally vetted, but the meaning is unmistakable. The ground has spoken, finally, in a voice quiet but clear enough to hear. The news is shared first with Emily's family, then with the court, then with the public. The announcement does not bring celebration. It brings a stillness that feels almost sacred. Vigils are held again, this time with fewer speeches and more silence. Candles flicker in the same streets where flyers once hung. Names are spoken. Prayers are whispered. Mark Delaney's appeal continues, but the landscape has shifted. The partial conviction now sits alongside a growing body of evidence that suggests a fuller story, one that may yet demand a reckoning beyond what has already occurred. His silence, once a shield, now reads as something else entirely, a refusal to engage with a truth that no longer depends on his cooperation. The cold case, once defined by absence, is now defined by fragments, by recovered pieces that refuse to stay buried. It is not solved. Not yet. But it has crossed a threshold from speculation to substance, from haunting question to emerging answer. And in Texas, in a town that has lived for years with a story that wouldn't end, the air feels different again, not lighter, but steadier, as if the ground beneath their feet has shifted just enough to remind them that time, relentless and patient, has a way of exposing what it has been holding all along. By the time the calendar turned again, the case no longer lived only in filing cabinets or whispered recollections. It lived in the air of the town, in the way conversations stalled when a name was spoken too loudly, in the way doors closed a little faster at night. The cold case had been reopened, yes, but reopening did not mean relief. It meant pressure. It meant the past, once buried under routine and denial, now clawing its way back with sharp fingers. Every new interview stirred old resentments. Every knock from law enforcement reopened wounds that had never healed cleanly in the first place. People who thought they had outrun 2001 discovered that time does not forgive. It waits. Investigators felt it too. The room where they worked was quiet, but the silence carried weight. Evidence boxes were stacked like tombstones, each one marked with dates that seemed impossibly distant. Photographs of the crime scene, grainy, overexposed, imperfect, stared back at them from corkboards. A street corner frozen in amber. A doorway half in shadow. A patch of ground where something irreversible had happened. They studied those images not as history, but as unfinished business, hunting for details that might have been invisible 20 years ago. A footprint pattern that didn't match the narrative. Fibers that suggested movement where none had been reported. A vehicle description that back then was dismissed as unreliable, but now aligned too neatly with new testimony to ignore. The midnight raid changed everything and nothing at the same time. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, but inside the investigation, it created a new kind of tension. Because an arrest is not a resolution. It is a question mark. The trusted family friend sat in custody, his face suddenly familiar to millions through news footage, but the case itself remained restless. He said little. When he did speak, his words were measured, almost rehearsed. He denied involvement with a calm that unsettled even seasoned detectives. Calm can be innocence. Calm can also be practice. The difference is rarely obvious at first glance. What gnawed investigators was not just what he said, but what he avoided. He spoke freely about his years in the community, about barbecues, birthdays, late-night phone calls where he claimed to have comforted grieving relatives. He remembered the town vividly, its rhythms, its small dramas. But when the conversation drifted too close to the hours surrounding the crime, his memory became foggy. Timelines blurred. Details slipped. He insisted he had been somewhere else, doing something ordinary, something forgettable. Ordinary is a convenient shield. Forgettable is a refuge. Outside the interrogation room, rumors multiplied faster than facts. Some residents insisted the arrest was overdue justice, proof that the system, though slow, eventually corrects itself. Others whispered that the investigators were desperate, that they needed a villain to justify reopening a case that should have remained closed. Old friendships fractured along invisible fault lines. People who once sat together in church pews now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. The town had survived the original shock in 2001, but this new phase was different. This was not tragedy striking from the outside. This was suspicion turning inward. And still, the victim's name hovered over everything, a reminder of why the case mattered beyond headlines and press conferences. She had been more than a photograph, more than a file number. She had been a presence, a laugh, a future abruptly erased. Investigators revisited her life not to sensationalize it, but to understand it fully. Her routines, her relationships, the last places she had gone willingly. Patterns began to emerge, not dramatic revelations, but subtle inconsistencies. A meeting that was never officially scheduled. A phone call logged but never explained. A sense that she trusted someone enough to lower her guard, enough to step into a situation that, in hindsight, felt wrong. The cold case label clung to the investigation like frost. It reminded everyone that time had already done its damage. Witnesses' memories had degraded. Physical evidence had been compromised by years of storage, by outdated collection methods. Some leads were gone forever, buried with people who had died without ever knowing their knowledge might matter. Each step forward felt heavy, like walking through deep water. But the investigators kept moving, driven by a shared understanding. If they stopped now, the case would freeze again, perhaps for good. Late nights became routine. Files spread across desks, coffee cups accumulating like evidence of endurance rather than caffeine dependence. Detectives argued quietly over interpretations, over whether a particular detail was coincidence or connection. They replayed recorded interviews, listening not just to words but to pauses, to breathing, to moments where voices changed pitch. In one recording, the arrested man mentioned the victim's name with a familiarity that bordered on intimate. In another, he corrected an investigator on a detail that had never been released to the public. Was it a slip? Or had that detail been shared privately years ago, in conversations long forgotten? The line between damning and explainable was thin, and everyone knew it. Media coverage intensified. Headlines screamed about the reopened cold case, about the trusted family friend now in handcuffs. Commentators speculated endlessly, filling airtime with theories that ranged from plausible to absurd. For the family, it was unbearable. They had waited years for answers, and now those answers were being debated by strangers who treated the case like entertainment. The family spoke rarely, but when they did, their words were careful, restrained. They wanted justice, yes, but they also wanted truth. Not a convenient ending. Not a story that fit neatly into a headline. Truth, even if it was complicated. Even if it hurt. As weeks passed, the investigation reached a strange equilibrium. Momentum existed, but certainty did not. The arrested man's legal team moved quickly, challenging evidence, questioning procedures, highlighting the gaps created by time. They argued that memories were unreliable, that forensic techniques had evolved, that what seemed compelling now would not withstand scrutiny in court. And they weren't entirely wrong. Cold cases are fragile things. They depend on stitching together fragments that were never meant to bear so much weight. Still, there were moments that felt electric. A newly discovered document, buried in an old archive, suggested that a tip from 2001 had never been fully followed up. The tip described a confrontation, heated and emotional, involving someone the victim trusted deeply. The name on the document matched the man now in custody. It wasn't proof. It wasn't enough. But it was a thread, and investigators pulled at it carefully, afraid of what might unravel. The town watched, holding its breath without realizing it. People checked the news compulsively, then pretended not to care. They debated quietly at kitchen tables, weighing loyalty against logic. Could someone so familiar, so woven into the fabric of daily life, really be responsible for something so violent? Or was this another tragic misstep, another chapter in a story defined by uncertainty? The cold case had reopened, but clarity remained elusive. As the investigation pressed on, one truth became unavoidable. Whether or not the arrest led to a conviction, the past could not be resealed. The town had been changed again, forced to confront the idea that safety had always been an illusion maintained by trust. The case lingered, unresolved, heavy with implication. Somewhere between memory and evidence, between belief and doubt, the truth waited, silent and patient, as it had for more than 2 decades. And the voice of the case, low and insistent, continued to whisper that this was not the end. The longer the reopened cold case dragged on, the more it began to feel like a living thing, breathing in pressure and exhaling doubt. Court dates were scheduled, postponed, rescheduled again, each delay stretching nerves thinner. Paperwork multiplied. Motions stacked atop motions. Every procedural step carried the weight of decades, as if the past itself were leaning over the shoulders of everyone involved, whispering reminders that this was never meant to be easy. Justice delayed is justice endangered, some said. Others countered that justice rushed is justice distorted. The truth, as always, hovered somewhere in between, just out of reach. Inside the jail, the trusted family friend settled into a routine that felt almost surreal, given the magnitude of the accusations. Morning count. Cold trays slid through metal slots, the echo of distant voices bouncing off concrete. He spoke rarely to other inmates, keeping to himself, reading newspapers that carried his own face on the front page. When his attorneys visited, their conversations were intense but controlled, filled with legal language that sounded clinical against the rawness of the crime itself. He maintained his innocence with consistency, insisting that the town had turned on him out of fear, not evidence. That reopening a cold case after so many years was an invitation for mistakes. That memories rot. That assumptions harden into facts if repeated often enough. Investigators, meanwhile, faced their own reckoning. Reopening the case had exposed flaws not only in the original investigation, but in the system that allowed those flaws to calcify over time. Evidence logs from 2001 were incomplete. Chain of custody records contained gaps that defense attorneys now circled like predators. Back then, no one imagined this case would still matter 2 decades later. Back then, urgency overshadowed precision. Now, every oversight carried consequences. Detectives had to rebuild trust in the bones of an investigation that had aged badly, convincing a skeptical legal system that the truth had not expired. They returned again to the scene, or what remained of it. The street looked smaller now, more ordinary, stripped of the chaos that once defined it. New houses stood where old ones had been torn down. Fresh coats of paint hid walls that had once held secrets. Yet standing there, investigators felt the echo of that night in 2001, the sense that something had gone terribly wrong in a place that should have been safe. They walked the path the victim had taken, counting steps, measuring sight lines, imagining sounds swallowed by darkness. It was an exercise in reconstruction, yes, but also in humility. The past does not repeat itself on command. It resists. One detail refused to let go. A narrow window of time, less than an hour, where the victim's movements were still unclear. Phone records ended abruptly. Witness statements contradicted each other, just enough to be useless. Somewhere in that window, the crime occurred. Somewhere in that window, trust was weaponized. Investigators believe the arrested man fit that window too neatly to ignore. He had access. He had opportunity. He had proximity that night, even by his own admission. The question was not whether he could have done it, but whether the evidence could ever prove that he did. The community's patience wore thin. Public forums turned hostile. Social media amplified every rumor, every half-formed theory. Armchair detectives dissected the case with confidence unburdened by responsibility. Some accused law enforcement of tunnel vision, of clinging to a suspect because the narrative was compelling. Others accused them of cowardice for not having acted sooner. The town fractured into camps defined not by facts but by belief. Belief in the system. Belief in a man they thought they knew. Belief that monsters look like monsters, not neighbors. For the family, time became a cruel paradox. They had waited so long for movement that now, with the case active again, every day felt unbearable. Hope and dread coexisted in equal measure. Hope that this was finally the path to answers. Dread that those answers might never come, or worse, that they would come distorted by compromise and doubt. They visited the grave often, speaking softly, updating their loved one on developments as if she could hear. In a way, they believed she could. That the truth had a way of pulling toward the surface, no matter how deep it was buried. Behind closed doors, prosecutors wrestled with strategy. Cold cases demand a different kind of storytelling, one that acknowledges absence as much as presence. They had to explain why it took so long, why evidence was incomplete, why witnesses were uncertain. Every weakness would be exploited. Every gap would be magnified. Yet there were strengths too. Patterns that only emerged with time. Behaviors that, in retrospect, looked less like coincidence and more like concealment. The challenge was weaving those threads into a narrative strong enough to withstand scrutiny without overstating what they could prove. Then came another development, quiet but significant. A former resident, someone who had left town years ago and rarely looked back, contacted investigators after seeing coverage of the arrest. At first, the tip seemed minor, almost trivial. A memory of a conversation overheard. A comment made late at night, dismissed at the time as drunken exaggeration. But as the witness spoke, details sharpened. The tone, the context, the way the comment referenced the crime with an intimacy that felt wrong. The name mentioned matched the man in custody. The timing aligned with the narrow window investigators had struggled to define. The interview was careful, methodical. Investigators knew better than to rush. They corroborated what they could, cross-checking timelines, verifying the witness's location at the time. Nothing was definitive, but the shape of the case shifted subtly, like a shadow changing direction. Defense attorneys moved just as quickly, questioning credibility, suggesting memory contamination from years of media exposure. The battle lines hardened. Every new piece of information was both a step forward and a potential liability. As the legal process crept onward, something else became clear. Even if a verdict were reached, even if a conviction or acquittal finally stamped an ending on paper, the case would not truly end. Cold cases rarely do. They leave residue, questions that linger, alternate theories that refuse to die. The town would carry this story forever, retelling it in different ways, emphasizing different villains, different failures. The crime had already shaped a generation. Now it was shaping the next, teaching them that certainty is fragile and trust, once broken, never fully repairs. Late one night, an investigator sat alone, listening again to an old recording. The victim's voice, captured incidentally on a voicemail weeks before her death. Casual, unafraid, alive. The sound cut through years of paperwork and procedure, a reminder of what had been lost. This was not about headlines or reopened cold cases or dramatic arrests. It was about a life interrupted and a truth postponed. The investigator closed his eyes, letting the silence return, heavy and unresolved. Outside, the town slept uneasily. Porch lights glowed. Dogs barked at shadows. Somewhere, a radio played softly, carrying news of the case to anyone awake enough to listen. The arrest had promised answers, but it had delivered something else instead: confrontation. With memory. With doubt. With the uncomfortable possibility that the truth, when it finally emerges, may not bring the relief everyone expects. The cold case pressed on, neither alive nor dead, suspended in a space where justice strained against time. The trusted family friend waited behind bars. The community waited for clarity, and the victim waited for a reckoning that had already taken too long. The story moved forward, but its ending remained obscured, wrapped in silence and shadows, as if daring anyone to claim they knew how it would end. In the end, the cold case did not conclude with a slam of certainty, but with a slow, aching fade into ambiguity, the kind that settles into a place and never fully leaves. Courtrooms filled and emptied. Arguments were made with precision and passion, each side carving at the same block of history, trying to shape it into something definitive. The evidence spoke, but it spoke in fragments, its voice cracked by time. Witnesses testified, their words heavy with the awareness that memory is not a recording but a reconstruction, altered each time it is revisited. Every statement carried an echo of doubt, not because it was false, but because it was human. The trusted family friend sat at the center of it all, his posture steady, his expression unreadable. To some, he looked like a man wronged by circumstance, a familiar face trapped in a narrative that had grown beyond control. To others, he looked exactly like what they had always feared but never named, proof that danger does not announce itself, that it blends in, that it earns trust patiently. Cameras captured every blink, every tightened jaw, freezing moments and projecting meaning onto them. The public searched his face for answers the evidence could not conclusively provide. The prosecution laid out its case carefully, acknowledging the years that had slipped by, the mistakes made when the crime was fresh and urgency overshadowed foresight. They spoke of patterns, of opportunity, of a relationship that granted access when access mattered most. They described how trust had become the doorway through which violence entered. They asked the jury not for certainty beyond all doubt, but for belief grounded in what remained after doubt had been exhausted. The defense responded with equal force, dismantling timelines, questioning recollections, reminding everyone that suspicion is not proof and that a cold case, by its nature, is vulnerable to narrative temptation. They argued that reopening the past does not resurrect clarity, that it often creates illusion instead. Outside the courthouse, the town held its breath. Conversations grew quieter, more cautious. People learned which words to avoid, which topics to circle without touching. The case had stripped away the comfort of simple explanations. It forced everyone to acknowledge how easily a story can fracture, how quickly certainty erodes when exposed to time. Parents locked doors earlier. Old friends avoided eye contact. The town was no longer just a setting. It was a participant, shaped by what it feared to know. For the family, the proceedings were an exercise in endurance. They listened as strangers spoke their loved one's name with professional detachment, reducing a life to evidence and argument. They watched the man accused of ending that life described in conflicting ways, villain and victim, predator and scapegoat. Each description felt incomplete. Each day ended the same way, with them returning home to a silence that no verdict could erase. Justice, they had learned, is not the same as peace. When the legal process reached its limit, when arguments had been made and countered until no new angles remained, the outcome arrived not as a revelation but as a compromise. The system did what it could with what it had, and what it had was imperfect. The decision, whatever words were used to frame it, failed to close the wound entirely. It answered some questions while sharpening others. It left room for interpretation, for disagreement, for the quiet, persistent thought that something essential had slipped through the cracks. The cold case, once reopened, refused to be neatly sealed again. Even after the cameras left and the headlines moved on, the story lingered. People replayed moments in their minds, wondering if they had missed something, if they had trusted the wrong person or doubted the wrong one. New theories surfaced in hushed conversations, in late-night messages sent and deleted. The case became part of the town's identity, a reference point for caution, a reminder whispered to newcomers as both warning and confession. Investigators moved on to other cases, but they carried this one with them, tucked into the corners of their thoughts. They knew they had done everything possible within the constraints of time and law, yet that knowledge brought little comfort. Cold cases teach a harsh lesson. Some truths resist resolution not because they are unknowable, but because they arrive too late, fragmented and fragile. The past does not owe the present clarity. Years later, the street where it all began looked ordinary again. Children rode bikes where crime scene tape once fluttered. Lawns were trimmed. Mailboxes repainted. Life continued, indifferent to the weight of history beneath it. But on certain nights, when the air grew still and sounds carried farther than usual, the memory of 2001 returned. Not as a specific image, but as a feeling. Unease. Absence. A question without an answer. The victim's name remained etched into records and hearts, a quiet insistence that she be remembered as more than a case. She was the reason the story mattered, the reason the cold case was ever reopened, the reason the town was forced to look at itself without illusion. Her absence shaped the narrative more powerfully than any piece of evidence, a constant reminder of what had been taken and what could never be restored. In the final analysis, the case offered no clean ending, no moment of collective exhale. Instead, it left behind a truth that was uncomfortable but enduring, that justice is not always complete, that certainty is rare, and that the past, once disturbed, never fully returns to rest. The cold case closed on paper, but in memory it remained open, a low hum beneath daily life, reminding everyone that some stories do not end, they echo. And so the voice of the case faded not into silence, but into the background noise of the town itself, carried in glances and pauses, in the unspoken understanding that something had happened here, something unresolved, something that time could not erase. The cold case had reopened, reshaped everything it touched, and then settled back into place, colder than before, waiting, not for answers, but to be remembered. Time did what it always does after the noise receded. It filled the gaps with routine. The courthouse steps emptied. News vans vanished. The town exhaled in pieces, never all at once. Officially, the case had reached its boundary, the line where process ends and memory takes over. Unofficially, nothing felt finished. The cold case had reopened a door that could not be closed again, and the draft that came through it lingered in every quiet moment, in every pause that followed a familiar name. People learned how to live around the absence. They learned which streets to avoid at night, not because they were dangerous, but because they carried weight. They learned how to change the subject mid-sentence when the conversation drifted too close to 2001. They learned to measure trust more carefully, to read silences as closely as words. The case had taught them that certainty is a luxury, and innocence, once questioned, is never fully restored in the public imagination. Even those convinced of the outcome felt the unease, the sense that belief itself had become conditional. The man at the center of it all faded from the headlines, but not from thought. His image remained suspended between interpretations, never settling into a single truth. To some, he was proof of a system that finally acted, however late. To others, he was evidence of how easily a narrative can harden when time erodes context. He carried the weight of both views, whether he wanted to or not. In a cold case, identity fractures under scrutiny. You become less a person and more a symbol, shaped by whoever is telling the story at that moment. Investigators returned to their desks, to new files with new dates, but the old ones stayed close. It surfaced unexpectedly, in training sessions, in quiet conversations between colleagues who had shared the long nights and heavy decisions. They spoke about it in fragments, careful not to pretend it had taught a simple lesson. It hadn't. If anything, it had complicated their understanding of justice. It reminded them that solving a case is not the same as healing a community, and that reopening the past can illuminate truth while deepening scars. The family continued forward because forward was the only direction available. They marked anniversaries privately now, away from cameras and speculation. They remembered their loved one as she had been before the case defined her, before her name became shorthand for tragedy. In their home, photographs remained unchanged, small acts of resistance against a world that had reduced her life to a sequence of events. They spoke her name without qualifiers, without legal context, refusing to let uncertainty rewrite who she was. Years passed. New residents moved into town, unaware of the history beneath their feet until someone mentioned it in passing, lowering their voice instinctively. The story was retold carefully, stripped of excess detail, shaped into a warning more than a narrative. This is where something happened. This is why people here lock their doors early. This is why trust is earned slowly. The cold case became folklore with teeth, a reminder that not all mysteries are ancient or distant. Some are recent enough to remember the fear. On certain nights, when the town lay still and the air carried sound farther than it should, the memory returned with clarity. Not as evidence, not as argument, as atmosphere. The sense that something unresolved still occupied space here, invisible but present. It lived in the way porch lights stayed on, in the way dogs barked at nothing, in the way people sometimes woke with the feeling that they had forgotten something important. Cold cases do that. They embed themselves into the nervous system of a place. The files remained archived, labeled, cataloged, technically complete. But completeness is a bureaucratic concept. Truth is messy. It leaks. It seeps through cracks in official endings. It survives in contradictions and unanswered questions, in the quiet acknowledgement that the past does not always yield to investigation. Sometimes it resists not because it wants to remain hidden, but because too much time has passed for it to speak clearly. And so the story did not end with resolution. It ended with continuation. With the town moving forward while carrying an extra weight it could never quite set down. With the cold case existing in two states at once, closed in records, open in memory. The echo remained, soft but persistent, a reminder that some crimes do not conclude. They settle, like dust, on everything that follows. The voice that once shouted through headlines and courtrooms diminished to a low hum, woven into daily life. It spoke in caution and doubt, in the understanding that the line between safety and danger is thinner than anyone wants to believe. The cold case had been reopened, examined, argued, and set back into place, altered by attention but not erased by it. And in that quiet aftermath, the truth, whatever shape it ultimately held, continued to exist not as an answer, but as a presence. Waiting. Remembered. Unresolved.